with our Neil LaunchNet, and I want to go ahead and introduce our speaker today, Ernie, and he's going to talk about branding and all that fun stuff with our businesses. So welcome, and I'm going to turn things over to you.
All right, thank you. My name is Ernie Farabaugh, and I'm with an agency just up the road called Aspire. And we do branding and marketing, marketing strategy, and promotions. So just a quick background about where I'm from and what I've been doing these last 20-odd years. I've spent my entire career in an agency, and that means I've been counseling clients, small businesses and large, on how to do some branding, some marketing, helping them with marketing strategy, and a lot of promotions. And most of that has been in the area of healthcare, home improvement, and the automotive aftermarket. But I've got a few others that are somewhat interesting. The Ohio Division of Travel and Tourism. I was on the account whenever the Division of Travel and Tourism decided to change from their direct response, 1-800-Buckeye, to branding. So we were trying to create a brand for the state of Ohio to compete with tourists coming in, choosing between Michigan, well, the surrounding states. We like to say if we can sell Ohio in January and February, we can pretty much sell anything. Another good one that is a little bit different is Elizabeth Arden, and I worked with them. I don't know if we have any Britney Spears fans in the room. One of their fragrances is Britney Spears Midnight Fantasy, and I worked on that account. That was pretty interesting. The Firestone Complete Auto Care, if you go into the Firestone stores, all the point of sale merchandising that you would see in there, manage that for a number of years. That would be all your ceiling danglers, window clings, wall posters, tire inserts. All the branding had to be consistent across all of those different pieces. Some of the others, Mercy St. Rita's is a hospital in Lima, and they're, of course, part of the Mercy organization that Mercy Lorain is a part of. And then Affinity Medical Center is a hospital in Massillon, and they were formed whenever two hospitals, Doctors Hospital and Massillon Community, merged. And they needed a new name. So I don't know if some of you in the room are at that point, maybe trying to decide on a name for your business, the positioning, logo, and all of those kind of things, the branding. We created all of that for an entire hospital. I guess the question is, why do we even need to brand? If we have a name for our company and we're out doing this advertising maybe in a small way, maybe you're using or relying on word of mouth, hopefully some social as well. All of the things that you see here lead up to what branding is really all about. And it's not just the company name or maybe a logo or tagline. It's all of the things that lead up to that, which is hopefully to connect with your target audience in a more emotional way, to try and get some mind share, I'll call it. So all of these things, it certainly helps create some recognition, differentiates you in the marketplace, can tell people, basically help them in their buying decision. That's really what it's all about. It shortens that buying decision process so that when they're in the grocery store or when they're deciding on where to go for a goods or service, it's an automatic instead of a decision process. This is a quote from the Wall Street Journal that is probably 12, 14 years old, but it's still appropriate today, maybe even more so, because this is really what it's about. A brand or corporate image is not something that can be seen, touched, tasted, defined, or measured. Intangible and abstract, it exists solely in the mind. It is often a company's most precious asset. It usually is not the product itself the consumer's after, but the enduring power of warm images, feelings, impressions associated with the brand. Now, if we can get to that, I would say it's a huge success, that your efforts have certainly paid off. I thought it'd be good to kind of go through and look at some ginormous companies with almost unlimited budgets and compare and see what they're doing. And on one hand, you think, well, they've got unlimited budgets, so it should be pretty easy. But on the other, when you really think about it, being so big, there's a lot of room for them to get it wrong. There's a lot of people that are involved, a lot of moving parts, and trying to control that brand can be pretty tough. But all of these companies and their brands have all of these traits in common. Amazon, we've all been there where we're getting emails that are specific to products we've purchased before. We see on the bottom things like if people who have bought this usually buy this or look at that. Coca-Cola, they're not just selling a soft drink, they're selling happiness. Open happiness is their current tagline, which is pretty cool. FedEx, for people in this room that are of a certain age, you can probably remember when they first broke into the market, it was when it absolutely positively has to get there overnight. And they live up to it. So that's certainly true for them. Apple is celebrating, I think, 10 years for the iPhone. And they've certainly revolutionized the phone industry or the mobile phone market. And now many of us can't imagine life without it. I was a convert from a BlackBerry back in the day. Target, people forget that Target is a discount retailer. They're just a discount retailer, but they've coined the term Target and shabby chic. Southwest is certainly quirky if anybody has flown there. The flight attendants always have a little routine. And then Nordstrom, even the Nordstrom Rack in Westlake, their customer service is just phenomenal. So all of those brands are able to be successful in part because of the qualities that we just described. And I thought it'd be a good idea to just kind of look at some of the other large ones that maybe don't get as much attention, but have really done it right over the years. Take John Deere, for example. The yellow and the green has been synonymous, the colors, and their tagline is decades old. Nothing runs like a deer. It still works. And I like how they've associated the farm equipment that's worth a couple $100,000 and still relating it back to the tagline. In the race against time, nothing runs like a deer. I'm a father of 3 daughters, so it's important to my wife and I that the girls grow up with a sense of that they're all beautiful in their own way. And Dove has really tapped into that. I think it's phenomenal what they've done, and they've created a fantastic social presence with their Dove Beauty Bar. Blondes have more fun, smile more. From an early age, women are exposed to statements and cliches masked as advice that dictates how we should look if we want to be accepted. We're showing the world that the only rules we live by are our own. Will you join us? And they've actually done some social media experiments, I guess. They've brought in people that are beautiful women, and they've had them go behind a screen, and they've had a police sketch artist, and they have to describe themselves to the police sketch artist. And they usually are pointing out their flaws. And so the police sketch artist, what he shows them when they're done is something that looks nothing like what they really are. And then they'll have somebody else explain or describe these women to them, and it's usually much, much closer. So I think there's a tendency for people to point out or look at their flaws, and Dove has kind of taken that on and really made it a whole social discussion about women and how society puts or imposes the idea of beauty on them. And it's a great story. And at the end of the day, they're just soap. It's just bar soap. Right here in Lorain County is Rigid. And for years, they were known as the company that had the calendars, the pinup calendars. And in the last couple of years, they've completely turned away from that, and they've focused instead on what their products mean to their customers or their consumers. So their campaign right now, Built for Those Who Know, and they've got a whole series of customers, real customers, and their stories about how they go to work every day carrying rigid tools to help them do their jobs. And then keeping it local, we got Smuckers. Many of you might know this, and maybe some don't, but Smuckers, the tagline, with a name like Smuckers, it has to be good. That was started right here, well, in Cleveland, by a wife of an ad agency executive. She recently passed away. And it's stuck. It's been around for decades as well. I think she started that in the 50s. But the plaid cap and that iconic Smuckers logo has been around and really withstood the test of time too. And then my last example is just another Lorain County duct brand duct tape and their use of promotions to help build their brand. They don't have a huge budget for advertising, but instead they focus a lot of their promotion dollars into doing things like this. And I think it's really ingenious. They have a program called Stuck at PROM. It's a scholarship, and you probably can't, you may not be able to tell, but his pants are made out of duct tape, and her dress is made out of duct tape. So the idea is that it's because of the age group, and PROM, of course, the audience is very tech savvy, social savvy, and they utilize that to create a viral promotion. And the idea is that they create their prom outfits out of duct tape, take pictures of it and send it in, and then the winner earns a scholarship, a college scholarship, which is really ingenious. So it really doesn't cost duct brand duct tapes a lot of money, but they get a lot of exposure on this. So let's switch gears and we'll talk a little bit about, for some of the room, you might be at a point, well, when do I need to really go about a whole branding campaign? The first one I have is if it's outdated. And I'll caution you that you're going to grow tired of the brand and the logo a lot sooner, a lot faster than your audience will. So unless it really isn't working, you may want to just stay with what you have and freshen it up a little bit. The other one is if you're doing if you've got a DBA and you want to create a separate ID, brand ID for that business. Maybe you're starting a company from scratch, doing some other kind of spin-off or separation. And then the last one is competitive pressures, where hopefully this isn't the case, but your competition is starting to find you and maybe encroached on the position that you've always held in the marketplace or in your area. And so you need to readdress that. So let's talk a little bit about what maybe the steps would be to take if you wanted to try and do some branding. The first thing I always advise clients is to take a look at the competition and really take an honest assessment of who is out there and what position they hold. So you want to be thinking about things like, is my competition promising the lowest price? Is it value? Is it quality? Is it customer service? Is it customization? What position do they hold in the marketplace? What promise are they making? And are they doing a good job with it? And then secondly, you want to pay attention to their logo design and colors. Obviously, if you're going to create your own, you don't want to duplicate some of theirs. The next part is then you start looking inward. Once you have a good idea of what is out there, then it's time to look inward and start asking yourself, okay, so what do my customers say about me? What do they say about my value, my pricing, my customer service? Maybe ask your staff. And then one that a lot of people overlook are their vendors. If you think about it, your vendors are calling on others like you in the market all the time, and they have a pretty good idea of what's working and what isn't. So you want to find out what is different about your business, what are you doing better, and try and exploit that. Some of the questions you want to be asking, and this is not, it's not really so much a scientific method, it's more anecdotal, but try and get as much information as you can, because I think the more people you talk to, the more input you're going to get, and you never know where some of the best input is going to come from. I'm going through a process right now with a client, and they're having me talk to, it's for a medical testing lab, and they're having me talk to not only patients, but referring physicians, vendors, and other major stakeholders that you would expect. The last one on here is, what do my customers know about my company values? And by that I mean, what do you profess to be most important? Is it the quality? Is it the customer service? What are you really hanging your hat on? Once you have all of that, then it comes to the step of trying to figure out what sort of name to use. And there's a couple ways of going about it. One of them is to just use an existing word, which is really tough because most of them have all been used. And if you have any intention of being anywhere on the web, you're going to have a hard time trying to find words that aren't, single words that aren't already used in some way. That means the URL is already taken. So you might have to do some sort of tweaking and add another word onto the to the URL. So in that lab example, integrity labs, for example, could be one approach. Another way to do it is to combine a couple of words. IntegraPath. Path is short for pathology. They're pathologists. And then some other new foreign language word. Verizon is a common example a lot of people use. But a foreign language word is also kind of unique because you can get to maybe a deeper meaning. Another client that I'm doing some work with is they're importing rugs from Kenya. And the rugs are being hand-woven by women in Kenya that then take the proceeds and they use it to support their families and their kids. So it's kind of a cause type of company. And we're looking at some Swahili words. And one of them is the word beautiful, which is nzuri. And people here wouldn't have any idea what that word means, but it can be paid off in a tagline. And you got to think about how it's being used. He's pretty much selling online, so it's always going to be living in a space where it has room or allows for a tagline. I want to caution you to think beyond your current product offerings or geography. The product offerings have a way of expanding over time. So if you think you're going to be in business and maybe you're only going to make cupcakes from now on, but then down the road you decide I want to get into pies or bread or whatever, you don't want to just be called cupcakes, for example. City limits tend to really constrain you as your business grows. So even if you think of it as a county, you can still end up being out of place. And I can think of a couple. I don't know why these come to mind, but like Lakewood Furnace. They obviously go far beyond Lakewood. Next would be considering your tagline. And I think of this as almost like a brand promise. And it's important to recognize you want to be in a space or you want to try to occupy, this is where your research is going to pay off, something that's not already owned. It has to be honest. So if I try and stay away from superlatives because that can always get you in trouble. The other thing you want to keep in mind too is this is really more of a of a process. And I tell clients this all the time when we're trying to come up with a name and a tagline. It's seldom one that you hit on right away and you know that that's the right word or the right tagline. You have to give it time. And you have to really let the research guide you and let it grow on you a little bit. Take your time with it and don't be pressured because you've got to file something with the county or something like that. Take your time with it and make sure that it's right, because it's going to be something you're going to be living with for a long time. The tagline that we're doing, going back to that rug example, because Nzuri is such it's a Swahili word, it means beautiful, and people aren't going to know that here. We want that to pay off in the tagline, so we're considering weaving beautiful stories of love, because the word beautiful is in the tagline, and it helps describe what their product offering is. Right now it's rugs, but it could expand to tapestries and scarves and things like that. So it has to also be believable and sustainable. It has to stand the test of time. A logo is not always necessary or mandatory. If you think back to some of the other examples I gave, Rigid, for example, doesn't really have a logo. It's their name. It's in a typeface. That is the logo. But I like to think of it as a shortcut to the brain. It's shorthand. They see the logo and they know immediately, if you've got the good brand recognition, who you are and what your company is and what you represent. It's also a great way to unify your collateral pieces. And by that I'm talking about your stationery, your business cards and envelopes and all of those elements. Under colors and details, I subscribe to the idea that you got to keep it simple. So in other words, think about your logo and not get too busy. I had one client one time that had a tree with a very ornate tree with leaves, and the leaves were falling, and by the time you scan that, make a photocopy of it, it starts to really break apart. And to make it smaller, it really doesn't hold up. So you have to think about how it's going to be utilized on different pieces. If you're a company that might get into having promotional items like pens, how's that logo going to hold up on a pen or any other piece? The colors, I like to try and stay with something that's very easily replicated, because sometimes you get into those promotional items and you need it to be a certain color. Well, they don't offer that color. So keep it simple. The cost to rebrand or to brand is pretty expensive. It can be. And you've got a lot of moving parts. If you really think about it, it's going to impact so many elements of your business, whether it's signage, apparel, business cards. All of that is pricey, and you need it to work for you. In order to do that, you've got to be consistent. There needs to be uniformity across all of it. So my suggestion is try and do as much as you can at once and not wait until your business cards run out, or the sign out front is a lot of money. And you want to try and do it as close in time as possible so that it pays off for you. Because the last thing you want is to have spent a lot of money and then you never get around to changing the sign out front. So let's talk about some of those touch points and pieces. Obviously the web, social component, the sales literature, things like folders, brochures, sell sheets, reports, and I'm going to add in there receipts, because what you leave with the customer is so important. Thanking them for their business, and you want that to be a source that could be a referral down the road. Obviously, your advertising, your promotions, that could be things like flexi flags out front, or even yard signs, things like that. Think about your product packaging. So if you've got something that is going to go home with the customer, you obviously want that to represent your new brand. Some of my clients have vehicles, whether it's a courier or they are landscaping. A great opportunity to put your brand on a vehicle, and everywhere you're driving, your brand is, you're getting exposure. Think about things like trade shows and your trade show booth, what you're going to have. It doesn't have to be very expensive. There's so many options nowadays that you can go online and you can buy some really nice trade show booth materials and have it done for you so that it looks very professional. Things like direct mail you might want to do in order to announce your new business or your rebranded business. And postcards are pretty inexpensive to have produced, whether it's done at a local printer or especially online. And it's a very, very inexpensive way to try and get the word out on your business, the new brand. Employee shirts, things like that, signage, not just the sign out front, but also your wayfinding signs in the building. And then something that a lot of people don't think about is how you want your greeting to be on your voicemail, or if you have a receptionist, how you want them answering the phone, and making them aware to say it the right way, and in Zuri, for example, how that's going to be said or pronounced. You want consistency. So I've got a couple of case studies that I thought it might be kind of fun to go through and just walk you through the process we used. The first one is a hospital lab. Well, they're both hospital labs, but this one is in, I think they're in Texas. And they were breaking off from the hospital. The hospital had a very good reputation, so we weren't trying to run away from a negative there. But they wanted their lab to be independent from the hospital because they were trying to capture more referring physician business. The way the hospital's labs works, they tend to like to batch. They can take a lot of samples at one time and run the test. And it costs about the same amount of money whether you've got a full tray or half full tray. So they wanted to try and create a profit center for the hospital. They couldn't do that if their couriers and the bags and drop boxes and things had the competing hospital's name on it. So they needed the hospital lab to appear as independent. So we did our research, and one thing that kept reoccurring over and over was the accuracy, and how important that is, obviously, for any medical testing lab, that they be accurate, and the information that can be gleaned from those results. So we recommended that they focus on accuracy as a niche. The large competing labs, maybe some of you have heard of them, LabCorp and Quest, they're all about speed and size. They can run some pretty complex tests. So the name we recommended was acuity, and the dictionary defines it. It's a noun. It's sharpness or keenness of thought, vision, or hearing, which works really well for a lab. So we focus more on the site. And the logo that we created, it looks a little bit busy, but there is a lot going on. And if you understand the meaning, it resonates even more with this audience. The large blue circle is representative of looking over the top of a test tube. Of course, the double helix is representative of the testing, the types of testing they do. And then we put another circle in the center of that to represent sort of an eye. So what they're able to see, the insight that they can get from running their tests. So let's put it all together. And the name is Acuity Diagnostics, Insight Through Analysis. All right. So I'll just take you through a couple of the collateral pieces. And you can see how we created a uniformity with the circles. That's going to be repeated over and over. This is the folder, and it's laying flat. And the inside pockets are actually half circles, so they're not just standard die cut. It's a little bit different, a little bit unique. And they use this as a leave behind when they're calling on physician practices. They have the folder, and then they have this brochure inside the folder. And we actually created some sell sheets. The sell sheets are a more expanded version of the stationery, and it allows them to customize the testing and the proposal for that audience. So if they're calling on a OBGYN, they're doing certain types of tests for that group, that audience, they can customize their sell sheet for that group of docs. And then the next day they're calling on a completely different type of doc that's doing different testing. They can customize it. So it works really well, but it keeps the uniformity, keeps the consistency across the different cell pages. Just the inside of the brochure, and again, the circles paying off. They had a lot to tell, a lot of pretty heavy copy. And then the website, which we created the template for them. Then just one more example. It's another lab, and they're out in Yellowstone. It's called Yellowstone Pathology Institute, YPI. And Yellowstone encompasses, I think it's 3 states, Wyoming, Montana, and Idaho. And it's pretty unique because this particular lab is a lab for other labs. So they get the toughest cases, and they just wanted a brand refresh. So we recommended they keep YPI. They had a lot of equity in that name, and we didn't want to abandon that. So we picked up on, because of their geographic location, we picked up on the colors, and that geo limitation that I was talking about earlier kind of made an exception for them because it encompasses 3 states. And in their service area, that's well beyond what they normally do. So in their situation, it was good. But if you look at the genetic code markings there, you can see the letters YPI. We stuck with the earth tones. And normally, I don't recommend showing your employees. Put it nicely, none of us are models. And the other big reason, though, is people tend to leave. And then you're stuck with showing somebody in the photo that might be working for your competition. Or the separation may not have been positive. So I don't usually recommend including a lot of photos, group photos of this is my company and my staff. It looks impressive, but usually it kind of falls short, I think, aesthetically. This particular group, we hired a professional photographer, and these are the docs. And they're all business, they own a portion of the business. So they weren't going anywhere, and we were able to shoot it professionally. We had them in a more casual setting in Yellowstone. That's kind of cool. And just more of their stationery and business cards. So I want you to, I brought this because I wanted you to see the continuity, how it carries into different pieces. There's some of their cell pages or templates. And the folder, because it's such a important piece for them when they call on physician groups, they really wanted their pieces to be high-end. So we made the YPI embossed so it stands out a little bit more. And the folder is it's a heavy cardstock. It's a very nice piece. Then we have some shots of the surrounding Yellowstone area in there, which is pretty cool. So, kind of summarize everything. The point I want to make sure that you all come away with today is that branding is really a multi-step process. The name and the colors and logos and all of that is certainly very important, and it can do a lot for you, but ultimately what you want to try to get to is creating a connection with your audience, almost on an emotional level, and make that such a strong connection that it makes their buying decision very easy.